All right, so you sent me some really fascinating material for this deep dive. It's all about Hermetica.
Yeah.
And I have to admit, before we started prepping for this, I thought Hermetica was like a fancy tea or something.
Hmm.
But wow, it turns out we're dealing with something really ancient and
Oh,
mysterious.
yeah. It's a really incredible collection of texts that are attributed to this mysterious figure, Hermes Trismegistus.
Okay.
And they have really influenced people for centuries. And it all goes back so far, we're talking prehistory,
Yeah.
to a time when the concept of Hermes himself was represented as just a simple stone pillar in ancient Greece.
Oh, wow. A simple stone pillar that evolves into like the symbol of wisdom, writing, and magic. It's like an origin story for knowledge itself.
Yeah, exactly.
So these Hermetic texts, they claim to hold some sort of universal wisdom that goes beyond cultures and time periods.
Yeah, that's the core idea.
Yeah.
It's this concept that there's this kind of deeper hidden knowledge that's accessible to those who seek it, that reveals the secrets of the universe and our place within it. And what's really fascinating is how these ideas took root and flourished during the Italian Renaissance.
Hmm.
Um, it became really intertwined with some of the most brilliant minds of that era.
Now, speaking of the Renaissance, one of the sources you sent me featured an interview with a scholar named Dr. Walter Hanegraaff.
Mhm.
And he studies Hermetic philosophy.
Right.
And honestly, I'm ready to have my assumptions challenged here because he argues that some of the most famous Renaissance figures that we associate with Hermetica,
Right.
like Ficino, Pico della Mirandola, Giordano Bruno,
Yes.
he says they weren't actually true Hermetic thinkers.
Right.
It's like finding out your favorite band just did covers this whole time.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Dr. Hanegraaff points out that while these figures were influenced by Hermetic texts, their core interests and philosophies ultimately lay elsewhere.
Mm.
So Ficino, for example, was really deeply immersed in Platonism.
Right.
Pico was captivated by Kabbalah. And Bruno developed his own kind of unique, expansive philosophical system. So their engagement with Hermetica was more like, borrowing threads
Okay.
rather than weaving the whole tapestry.
Okay. So if these Renaissance rock stars weren't the true Hermetic heroes, then who was?
Dr. Hanegraaff points to a lesser-known humanist poet
Okay.
named Lovato Lazzarelli.
Lovato Lazzarelli. Okay.
Yeah,
I'm all about uncovering these hidden gems.
yeah.
So tell me what made Lazzarelli's understanding of Hermetica so unique and profound.
Well, his story is one of those amazing historical intersections that really captures the spirit of the Renaissance.
Yeah.
Um, he had this remarkable encounter with this guy named Giovanni da Corio,
Okay.
who was a charismatic preacher,
Hmm.
who staged this really dramatic entry into Rome, mimicking Christ's arrival in Jerusalem. So picture this. Crowds lining the streets, Corio riding in on a donkey,
Wow.
people laying down palm branches.
That's quite an entrance. Talk about a grand opening act.
Yeah, it was a spectacle designed to evoke powerful religious imagery.
Okay, so how does this preacher tie into Lazzarelli's Hermetic journey?
Well, Lazzarelli saw Corio as a kind of hermetic Christ, a figure who embodied the fusion of pagan wisdom with Christian revelation.
Uh-huh.
And this encounter deeply impacted Lazzarelli, shaping his understanding of Hermetica and its potential to unlock this kind of spiritual transformation. And in fact, it's this concept of spiritual rebirth that forms the core of Lazzarelli's most important work,
Okay.
called Crater Hermetis.
Crater Hermetis. Intriguing. It sounds like we're about to go deep into some Renaissance mystery schools here.
We are.
So set the stage for us. Who was Lazzarelli teaching, and what was this spiritual rebirth all about?
Okay, so in Crater Hermetis, Lazzarelli casts himself as Hermes Trismegistus,
Okay.
and he's teaching his students, King Ferrante of Naples and the scholar Pontano,
Oh, wow.
about the secrets to achieving true happiness. And this idea of rebirth, of shedding an old self and embracing a new way of being, isn't unique to Hermeticism. You see it in various traditions: Hindu Enlightenment, the Sufi concept of union with God, even the Christian baptism.
Hmm.
But Lazzarelli frames it through this distinctly Hermetic lens.
So he's drawing on this universal human longing for transformation, but giving it a specific Hermetic flavor.
Exactly.
And if I'm reading between the lines here, Lazzarelli's take on spiritual rebirth goes beyond just a change in perspective, right?
Yes.
The source material mentions something about making souls.
All right.
Which sounds pretty audacious.
It is.
Even for a Renaissance thinker.
Yeah, you're picking up on something very important.
Okay.
Lazzarelli takes this idea of spiritual rebirth to a whole other level. He draws on this controversial passage in the Hermetic text Asclepius, where Hermes talks about the ancient Egyptians supposedly animating statues.
Okay, hold on. We're not talking Frankenstein-style creation here, are
No,
we?
no, no. Lazzarelli, being a devout Christian, wasn't advocating for bringing sculptures to life.
Okay.
He reinterpreted this idea metaphorically.
Okay.
He's talking about a process of inner transformation.
Huh.
That's so profound. It's like creating a soul anew.
So what did he mean by making souls in this metaphorical sense?
Well, Lazzarelli believed that through a process of deep self-knowledge and spiritual practice, we could refine and elevate our souls, ultimately achieving a state of divinity. He draws on this hermetic concept of nous, which is this divine light present within each of us from birth. And just so we're clear, nous isn't simply knowledge, it's a life-giving force, a source of energy and vitality that can animate and elevate the soul.
Okay.
Think of it as the spark of the divine within.
Okay, I'm starting to see where Lazzarelli is going with this. So
Yeah.
it's like we have this raw potential, this divine spark within us, but it needs to be cultivated and brought to life.
Exactly.
And Lazzarelli's arguing that through this process of making souls, we can actually tap into our divine nature and experience a kind of spiritual rebirth.
Precisely. And this idea of making souls,
Mm.
of actively engaging in our own spiritual transformation, connects to an analogy that's quite relevant here. You only truly understand something when you can build it yourself.
Oh, I'm with you there. Nothing like a botched IKEA assembler to really make you appreciate furniture making.
Exactly. So Lazzarelli uses this similar logic. He suggests that by actively reconstructing our understanding of the soul, by engaging in practices that purify and elevate our inner being, we're in effect making it anew. It's like taking all the raw materials of our being and carefully crafting them into a masterpiece.
That's a really powerful way to think about it. So it's not just about passively absorbing information about the soul. It's about actively engaging in its creation, its refinement. So what were some of the methods or exercises that Lazzarelli suggested for this soul-making process? Did he have like a spiritual workshop?
He did, in a sense. He outlined these specific practices and ways of thinking that were designed to help individuals access
Right.
and cultivate that divine spark within. One of the most intriguing aspects of his approach is how he uses symbolism and metaphor to guide his students.
Okay.
For instance, he draws on the myth of Pandora's jar to illustrate the challenges and temptations we face on the path to spiritual rebirth.
Okay. I can see how that myth would resonate. Pandora's jar is all about unleashing chaos and suffering into the world.
It is.
So how did Lazzarelli connect this to Hermetic principles?
Well, he reinterprets the myth of Pandora's jar as a representation of these inner struggles we face on our spiritual journey.
Okay.
So remember, the jar contains all sorts of evils and misfortunes, but at the bottom there's also hope.
Right.
So for Lazzarelli, this signifies the challenges and distractions of the material world,
Okay.
the things that can pull us away from our true nature.
So the trick is to avoid opening the jar entirely.
Not quite. Lazzarelli suggests that we can't avoid encountering the contents of the jar. We will inevitably face challenges and temptations, and even suffering in life.
Right.
The key is to not become overwhelmed by these forces,
Okay.
to maintain a sense of hope, and to recognize that the divine spark within us can help us navigate these difficulties.
So instead of fearing the contents of the jar, we need to learn how to work with them to transform them into something positive.
Exactly. And this ties back into the idea of making souls. By facing our challenges head on, by choosing to align ourselves with the divine light within us, we can transform those very experiences into opportunities for growth
Okay.
and spiritual refinement.
This is getting really fascinating. But why should our listener care about this Renaissance poet and his interpretation of these ancient texts? What's the relevance for their lives today?
That's a great question. I think what makes Lazzarelli's teaching so compelling is that they offer a practical guide for navigating the complexities of life.
Okay.
You know, he's not just offering abstract philosophical concepts.
Right.
He's presenting a roadmap for achieving genuine happiness and fulfillment. And that's something that I think we can all relate to, regardless of our spiritual beliefs or backgrounds.
So it's about finding a way to tap into that divine spark within, to transform our challenges into opportunities for growth, and ultimately create a more meaningful and fulfilling life.
Precisely. And what's even more fascinating is how his approach differs from those more famous Renaissance figures we often associate with Hermetica.
Right.
So Ficino, for example, with his translation of the Corpus Hermeticum, is often credited with reviving Hermeticism during the Renaissance.
Yeah.
But Lazzarelli took those ideas in a whole new direction.
Okay, I'm hooked. Tell me more about how Lazzarelli's interpretation diverged from these Renaissance giants? What made his approach so unique?
Well, as we discussed earlier, Ficino was more of a translator than a true believer.
Right.
His primary interests lay in Platonism,
Okay.
and he saw Hermetic texts through that lens. Lazzarelli, on the other hand, fully embraced the Hermetic worldview and sought to integrate it into his life and teachings. And one of the most striking differences lies in how they interpreted the concept of the mixing bowl.
A mixing bowl. Now, that's an image I wouldn't necessarily associate with ancient wisdom. What's the significance of this symbol?
Well, the mixing bowl appears in Lazzarelli's Crater Hermetis, as well as in the Hermetic text, Corpus Hermeticum, the Fior. And these sources describe this bowl as being filled with nous, that divine light sent down by God, which represents our innate potential. However, it's also implied that this bowl contains other things,
Okay.
chaotic cosmic forces, even those demonic entities that Hermes helps Thoth expel in the Corpus Hermeticum.
Hold on. Quick rewind here. Who are Thoth and Amun, and how do they fit into all this?
Right. So to understand Lazzarelli's interpretation, we have to consider the context of the Hermetic texts themselves. So Thoth is the Egyptian god of writing and wisdom, often associated with Hermes Trismegistus
Okay.
in Hermetic tradition.
Okay.
Amun, on the other hand, is a powerful creator god,
Okay.
similar to the Greek Zeus. In one of the Hermetic texts, these two deities have this debate about whether wisdom can truly be transmitted through writing.
Wow.
Thoth argues that it can, while Amun believes that words are insufficient
Oh, interesting.
to capture the essence of true knowledge. And this debate highlights this central question in Hermeticism. Can written words truly convey profound wisdom?
Mm.
Lazzarelli, and perhaps even our discussion today, suggest that they can.
So this mixing bowl, it's like a microcosm of existence itself. It
Mhm.
contains both the divine and the chaotic,
Yeah.
the light and the shadow. So what does this tell us about Lazzarelli's worldview?
Well, it suggests that Lazzarelli saw the human experience as this complex interplay between opposing forces.
Okay.
We each carry within us the potential for both great good and great harm. The mixing bowl is this powerful reminder that life is not about achieving perfect purity
Right.
or eradicating our shadow side. It's about learning to navigate these contrasting forces within ourselves and the world around us.
So we're not aiming for a bland, homogeneous spiritual smoothie here.
No.
We're embracing the richness and complexity of the full human experience.
Exactly. And this is where Lazzarelli's teachings get really interesting because he offers specific guidance on how to work with these internal forces
Okay.
and achieve a kind of spiritual alchemy.
All right, you've definitely piqued my curiosity. Let's unpack Lazzarelli's approach to spiritual alchemy in more detail and see how it connects to this idea of the mixing bowl. But first, I need to grab a refill on my metaphorical mixing bowl. What are you having?
Well, if we're going with the analogy, I think I'll stick with the nous, that pure divine light, for now.
Okay.
But who knows? Maybe later we'll explore some of the more intriguing, perhaps even chaotic ingredients in the mix.
Sounds like a plan. Okay, so we're back. And our metaphorical mixing bowls are full. I'm ready to dive into Lazzarelli's recipe for spiritual alchemy. Where do we begin?
Well, remember that Lazzarelli saw this mixing bowl as a representation of the human soul itself, a vessel containing both that divine light, nous, and those chaotic, even demonic elements. He believed that through specific practices and ways of thinking, we could learn to separate and refine these elements, allowing the divine light to shine brighter.
So it's like a spiritual version of separating the wheat from the chaff. Or extracting gold from ore. What did this process actually look like? Did he provide like a step-by-step guide to soul making?
He did, in a sense. Lazzarelli outlined 3 key stages in this process: purification, illumination, and union. Think of them as the alchemical stages of transforming the raw materials of our being into spiritual gold.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Walk me through these stages. What does purification involve?
Well, purification is all about recognizing and releasing the negative patterns of beliefs and behaviors that cloud our inner vision and keep us from accessing our true nature. It's about confronting our shadow side. You know, those aspects of ourselves that we'd rather keep hidden and bringing them into the light of awareness.
That sounds like some serious inner work. What kind of practices did he recommend for this purification process?
Well, he emphasized self-reflection, meditation, and engaging in honest self-appraisal. He believed that by carefully examining our thoughts, emotions, and actions, we could identify the sources of our suffering and begin to free ourselves from their grip. He also encouraged studying philosophy and engaging in intellectual pursuits as a way to refine the mind and cultivate discernment.
So it's not about denying or suppressing those negative aspects of ourselves, but rather about facing them head on and understanding their origins. It's like acknowledging the ingredients in our mixing bowl, even the less desirable ones.
Exactly, and this is where Lazzarelli's Christian faith comes into play. He believed that through prayer and contemplation on the life and teachings of Jesus, individuals could find the strength and guidance to navigate this really challenging stage of purification.
It makes sense that he would draw on his faith for support in such a demanding process. So once we've done some serious soul scrubbing, what's next? Tell me about this illumination stage.
Okay, so illumination is where things start to get really interesting. It's about opening ourselves to the influx of divine light, nous, and allowing it to permeate every aspect of our being. Lazzarelli described this as experiencing a kind of inner awakening, a direct apprehension of divine reality that transcends our limited human perception.
Okay, now we're getting into mystical territory here. How did Lazzarelli suggest we could achieve this state of illumination?
Well, he believed that consistent practice of the purification stage would naturally lead to experiences of illumination.
Okay.
As we release those limiting beliefs and negative patterns, we create more space for the divine light to shine through. He also emphasized the importance of cultivating virtues like humility, compassion, and love.
This reminds me of something you mentioned earlier
Yeah.
about how the act of understanding itself can be a form of hermetic magic.
Yes.
It's like by engaging with these ideas, by
Mhm.
wrestling with them and making them our own, we're already participating in this process of illumination.
That's a brilliant insight. Lazzarelli would likely agree. He saw the pursuit of knowledge and wisdom as essential to spiritual growth. But he also emphasized the importance of lived experience. He believed that true understanding couldn't be gained through intellectual study alone. It had to be embodied and expressed through our actions and interactions with the world.
So it's not enough to just read about Hermetica and nod our heads in agreement.
Right.
We have to actually put these principles into practice in our daily lives. Otherwise, it's like having a beautifully crafted mixing bowl, but never actually using it to create anything.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And this brings us to the final stage in Lazzarelli's process of soul-making union.
All right. I'm ready for the grand finale. What does this union entail?
So union is the culmination of the entire process. It's about achieving a state of oneness with the divine, a complete merging of our individual consciousness with the universal source. Lazzarelli describes this as a state of profound peace, joy, and creative power.
Now, this idea of union with the divine,
Mhm.
it might sound pretty abstract or even unattainable to some listeners. How did Lazzarelli ground this concept in practical terms?
Well, he emphasized that union isn't something we achieve overnight.
Right.
It's the result of a lifetime of dedicated practice and a deepening relationship with the divine. And he believed that as we progress through the stages of purification and illumination, we gradually become more attuned to the divine presence within us and in the world around us.
So it's about cultivating a sense of interconnectedness, of recognizing that divine spark not just within ourselves, but in all things.
Exactly. And Lazzarelli believed that this state of union wasn't just some abstract spiritual ideal. It had tangible consequences for how we live our lives. He saw it as the source of true creativity, compassion, and wisdom.
This makes me think about Lazzarelli's own creative output, his poetry and teachings. You know, he was clearly trying to share his understanding of these hermetic principles and inspire others to embark on this soul-making journey. But how did his approach differ from those other Renaissance figures we've discussed?
That's a key point. Remember how we talked about Ficino, primarily seeing Hermetic texts through a Platonic lens?
Yes.
Well, Ficino believed that true knowledge existed in a separate realm of forms, and we could only access it through contemplation and intellectual pursuit. Lazzarelli, however, believed that the divine was present in the material world itself, and we could experience union with it through engaging with life fully and consciously.
So for Lazzarelli, it wasn't about escaping the material world,
Right.
but rather about transforming it from within.
Precisely. And this is where his interpretation of Hermeticism becomes particularly relevant to us today. In a world that often feels fragmented and disconnected, Lazzarelli's teachings remind us that we have the power to create a more harmonious and meaningful existence by cultivating our inner connection to the divine and expressing that connection through our actions in the world.
It's like we're all alchemists in a way, working to transform the raw materials of our lives into something beautiful and transformative. But honestly, the idea of making souls still feels a bit mind-boggling. Isn't that a power reserved for the divine?
Yeah, you've hit upon one of the most fascinating and perhaps controversial aspects of Lazzarelli's interpretation. Remember that passage in the Asclepius about the Egyptians animating statues?
Yeah.
Lazzarelli uses this as a metaphor for our potential to become co-creators with the divine. Now, he doesn't mean we can literally conjure up spirits or build souls from scratch. Instead, he's suggesting that through spiritual practice and conscious living, we can shape and refine our souls to the point where we become vessels for divine creative power.
Okay, I'm starting to grasp the nuance here. It's not about usurping divine power, but rather about aligning ourselves with it and becoming instruments of its expression in the world.
Exactly. Think of it like this.
Hmm.
A skilled musician doesn't create the music itself, but rather channels it through their instrument.
Right.
Similarly, Lazzarelli believed that by cultivating our inner connection to the divine, we could become conduits for its creative energy, expressing it through our thoughts, actions, and creations.
That's a beautiful analogy. It suggests that we each have the potential to become artists of the soul, crafting masterpieces of meaning and beauty from the raw materials of our lives. But I'm curious, did Lazzarelli provide any specific examples of what this soul-making might look like in practice?
He did. Remember how we talked about him using the myth of Pandora's jar to illustrate the challenges we face on the path to spiritual rebirth?
Yeah.
Well, he also uses this myth to demonstrate how we can transform those challenges into opportunities for soul-making.
Okay, I'm all ears. How does Pandora's jar fit into this idea of becoming co-creators with the divine?
Well, Lazzarelli points out that when Pandora opens the jar, all sorts of evils and misfortunes are released into the world, but hope remains trapped inside.
Right.
And he interprets this to mean that even amidst suffering and hardship, there's always a glimmer of possibility, a potential for transformation. He believed that by facing our challenges with courage and wisdom, by choosing to align ourselves with the divine light within, we could transform those very experiences into sources of strength and growth.
So it's about finding the hope amidst the chaos, the potential for growth within the struggle.
Exactly. And this ties back into the idea of making souls. By actively engaging with our challenges, by using them as opportunities to learn and evolve, we are, in a sense, shaping and refining our souls. We're becoming more resilient, more compassionate, more aligned with our true nature. And through this process, we're also contributing to the transformation of the world around us.
It's like we're taking those chaotic elements in our mixing bowl and alchemizing them into something beautiful and life-giving. But I have to admit, it's still a bit daunting to think that we have this much responsibility, this much power to shape our own souls and influence the world around us.
Yeah, I understand your hesitation. It is a lot to take in. But I think Lazzarelli would remind us that we're not alone in this process. He believed that the divine is always present, supporting us and guiding us on our journey. And he saw this soul-making, not as a burden, but as a privilege, a way to participate in the ongoing creation of the universe.
That's a beautiful way to frame it. It shifts the perspective from one of fear and pressure to one of awe and possibility. But I'm curious, did Lazzarelli offer any practical guidance on how to tap into this divine support and navigate the challenges of soul-making?
He did. And this is where his teachings get really practical and applicable to our lives today. Lazzarelli believed that one of the most powerful ways to connect with the divine and cultivate our inner potential was through the practice of contemplation.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about Lazzarelli's approach to contemplation. What did it involve?
So for Lazzarelli, contemplation wasn't just about sitting quietly and emptying the mind. It was about actively engaging with spiritual truths, wrestling with them, and allowing them to transform our understanding of ourselves and the world. He encouraged his students to study sacred texts, reflect on their own experiences, and engage in dialogue with others who were also seeking spiritual growth.
So it's like a dynamic process of exploration and discovery, not just a passive state of mental stillness.
Exactly. And Lazzarelli believed that through consistent practice of contemplation, we could cultivate a deeper awareness of the divine presence within us and in the world around us. He saw this as a key to unlocking our creative potential and living a more meaningful and fulfilling life.
This makes me think about our own conversation right now. By delving into these hermetic texts, by exploring Lazzarelli's unique perspective, aren't we engaging in a form of contemplation ourselves?
I think we are. Remember that debate between Thoth and Amun about whether wisdom can truly be transmitted through writing? Well, Lazzarelli, and perhaps our discussion today, demonstrates the power of language to spark understanding and inspire transformation. We're taking these ancient ideas, wrestling with them, and allowing them to shape our own understanding of ourselves and the world.
It's like we're adding new ingredients to our mixing bowls, enriching the flavors, and creating something unique and potentially transformative.
I love that analogy, and it highlights the beauty of Hermetic thought. It's not a static set of doctrines, but rather a living tradition that continues to evolve and adapt. As we engage with it, Lazzarelli's interpretation is a testament to that. He took these ancient ideas, filtered them through his own experience and understanding, and offered a fresh perspective that continues to resonate with us today.
This has been a truly illuminating exploration of Lazzarelli's Hermetic teachings. I'm starting to see how his ideas offer a practical guide for navigating the complexities of life and creating a more meaningful and fulfilling existence. But I'm also aware that we're nearing the end of our deep dive. And I want to make sure we leave the listener with a clear takeaway, something they can ponder and apply to their own lives. What's the one key insight from Lazzarelli's teachings that you think is most relevant for us today?
That's a great question. If I had to choose one key takeaway from Lazzarelli, it would be his emphasis on the transformative power of conscious living. He believed that by cultivating our inner connection to the divine, by engaging with life fully and intentionally, we could become co-creators of a more harmonious and beautiful world. And I think that's a message that we all need to hear in these times.
It's a powerful reminder that we're not just passive observers in the cosmic drama. We have a role to play, a contribution to make.
Exactly. And that contribution starts with our own inner transformation. By cultivating our own soul, by refining those ingredients in our mixing bowls, we can become beacons of light and inspiration for others, radiating compassion, creativity, and wisdom into the world.
So it's not just about personal growth, it's about contributing to the collective good.
Precisely. Lazzarelli believed that as we each work on our own spiritual evolution, we create a ripple effect that extends outwards, influencing our families, our communities, and ultimately the world as a whole.
That's a truly inspiring thought to end on. But before we wrap up completely, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on one final question that's been swirling around in my mind. We've talked a lot about Lazzarelli's unique interpretation of Hermetica and its relevance for our lives today. But I can't help but wonder, what would Lazzarelli himself think of our modern world?
That is a fascinating question. I imagine he would be both intrigued and perhaps a bit disheartened by what he observed. On the one hand, he would likely be amazed by our technological advancements and the vast amount of knowledge available at our fingertips.
It's like the ultimate expression of Thoth's victory in that debate with Amun. Information is everywhere.
Exactly. But I also think Lazzarelli would be concerned by our tendency towards materialism, our disconnection from nature, and our often fragmented and frenetic pace of life.
It's like we've mastered the art of creating external abundance, but have neglected the cultivation of our inner landscapes.
That's a great way to put it. And I think Lazzarelli would see this as a missed opportunity. He would urge us to use our incredible resources and ingenuity to create a world that nourishes both our material and spiritual needs.
So it's not about rejecting technology or progress, but rather about integrating it into a more holistic and balanced way of life.
Precisely. Lazzarelli would likely challenge us to find ways to use technology to enhance our connection to the divine and to each other, rather than allowing it to distract us or isolate us.
It's a call to remember that the true measure of progress isn't just about what we create externally, but also about the quality of our inner lives and our relationships with each other and the world around us.
Exactly. And I think that's a message that resonates deeply with Lazzarelli's core teachings. He believed that true happiness and fulfillment come not from accumulating material possessions or achieving worldly success, but from cultivating our inner connection to the divine and expressing that connection through our actions in the world.
It's about becoming co-creators with the divine, not just consumers of the material world.
Precisely. And I think that's a powerful and timely message for us to consider as we navigate the complexities of modern life.
This has been an incredible deep dive into the world of Hermetica, and I'm especially grateful for your insights into Lovato Lazzarelli's unique perspective. It's not every day that we get to unearth such a hidden gem from history and discover its relevance for our lives today.
Well, the pleasure was all mine. It's always a joy to explore these ancient wisdom traditions and discover the enduring power they hold to inspire and transform us.
Now, before we sign off completely, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought, something to ponder, as they continue their own explorations. We've talked about Lazzarelli's 3 stages of soul-making: purification, illumination, and union. But I wonder, what might a 4th stage look like? Could there be a level beyond union? a state where we not only experience oneness with the divine, but also actively participate in its creative flow, bringing forth something entirely new into the world.
That is a truly provocative question. And I think it's one that Lazzarelli himself would have delighted in exploring. He was, after all, a man who believed in the boundless potential of the human spirit and our capacity to evolve beyond our current limitations. Perhaps this fourth stage, this realm beyond union, is not a fixed destination, but rather an ongoing journey of co-creation with the divine, a dance of ever-expanding awareness and creative expression.
A dance where we become not just vessels for divine light, but also catalysts for its transformation and evolution.
Precisely. It's a tantalizing possibility, isn't it?
Mm.
And one that invites us to embrace the mystery and wonder of our own existence and to approach life as a grand experiment in co-creation with the divine.
This has been a truly mind-expanding deep dive, and I want to thank you, our expert guest, for guiding us through the intricacies of Hermetic thought and for sharing your insights into Lovato Lazzarelli's remarkable life and teachings.
It has been my pleasure, and thank you to you, our host, for your thoughtful questions and for creating this space for us to explore these timeless wisdom traditions.
And, of course, a huge thank you to you, our listener, for joining us on this journey. We hope you found this deep dive into Hermetica enriching and inspiring. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking the hidden treasures of wisdom that await you in the most unexpected places. So before we took that little pause, we were talking about this idea that making souls might not just be about personal transformation, but also participating in the creative flow of the universe, like actually creating something.
Yeah, it's a concept that really stretches our understanding of what's possible.
It does.
Right. Lazzarelli seems to be suggesting that we have the potential to not just reflect the divine light, but like actually become co-creators with the divine.
Yeah.
Bringing something totally new into existence.
I keep thinking about that mixing bowl image that we talked about.
Yeah.
It's like he's saying that once we've kind of refined and purified the ingredients in our own mixing bowls, then we can use those ingredients to create something new and totally transformative.
Right.
But what would that even look like? I mean, in practical terms.
Right. That's the big question.
Yeah.
Lazzarelli himself doesn't really provide a detailed plan for what this next stage of soul-making would be.
Okay.
Maybe that's because he saw it as a realm of infinite possibility, a space where our creative potential could just unfold in ways we can't even imagine.
So it's like he's giving us the tools
Yeah.
and the inspiration to go on a grand creative adventure, but he's leaving the specifics up to us to figure out.
Exactly. And I think that's part of what makes his teaching so exciting.
Yeah.
And also so challenging. You know, he's not offering like a one-size-fits-all formula
Right.
for enlightenment. It's more like he's inviting us to become active participants in our own evolution, to explore the uncharted territories of our own souls and see what we have to offer.
This makes me think about Lazzarelli himself and his own creativity. You know,
Yeah.
he was a poet.
He was.
Do you think that he saw art as a way to tap into this divine creative power?
I think he absolutely did. Remember that he believed that the divine wasn't like off in some faraway place,
Right.
but present in the material world,
Mm-hmm.
waiting to be discovered and expressed through our creative work. For him, art wasn't just aesthetics or entertainment. It was a spiritual practice, a way to connect with the divine and to share its beauty and wisdom with the world.
So like every creative act, whether you're writing a poem, composing music, or baking a cake, it can become this sacred act.
Right.
Like a way to join in with the divine creative flow.
Precisely. I think Lazzarelli would want us to approach our creative work with a sense of reverence and intentionality, to recognize that we're not just making things, but we're co-creating with the divine, bringing something special into the world.
That's really inspiring. Makes me want to grab my mixing bowl and just start mixing up all kinds of new ingredients to see what I can create.
I love that. I think that's the kind of energy Lazzarelli wanted to inspire. You know, he wouldn't want us to get bogged down in rules and doctrines.
Right.
He wanted us to embrace the mystery of creativity and let our souls express themselves.
So what would this fourth stage of soul making even look like? This stage that's beyond union.
Right.
Maybe it's not a destination.
Right.
Maybe it's an ongoing creative exploration. This dance with the divine where we're always growing and creating new things.
Yeah, you got it. Lazzarelli reminds us that the spiritual path isn't linear. You know, it's a spiral
Right.
of awareness and expression, a dance that goes on throughout our lives and even beyond.
This has been a fascinating journey into Lazzarelli's teachings.
It has.
Thank you for sharing your expertise.
It was my pleasure.
Yeah.
I always love exploring these little-known figures from history and seeing how they can still speak to us today.
Yes. And a huge thank you to our listener for joining us. We hope this deep dive into Hermetica has inspired you to explore the amazing potential of soul-making. So, until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep creating.